The night pressed close over Windsor like black silk, thick with unspoken truths. Beneath the centuries-worn stones, a secret passage curled into darkness, carved long before her name would ever echo through history. A single torch sputtered low, its light trembling across damp walls. It caught the outline of a cross etched deep in stone, once crimson, now ghost-pale with time and silence. And beyond it waited a door, sealed and breathless, as if guarding something the world was never meant to see. On the night Queen Elizabeth II left this world, a ceremonial bell tolled 70 times through the darkness. The world mourned a monarch, a figure of constancy and grace. Yet, in the forgotten corners of dusty archives, and within the fading memory of a dying priest in Malta, another question stirred quietly. Was she truly the last of her kind? You've heard the official accounts of Elizabeth, the steadfast ruler, the elegant matriarch, the symbol of modern royalty. But what if that was only the surface? What if beneath the jewels and ritual, there pulsed a lineage far older than the British throne itself? One born in fire, carried through exile, and shrouded by generations of secrecy, a bloodline said to trace back not just to kings and queens, but to a brotherhood of warrior monks, to relics buried under Jerusalem, to the name that still sends echoes through time, the Knights Templar. For centuries, it was believed that the Knights Templar vanished after their ruthless downfall in The history books tell us they were destroyed, their power crushed, their order dissolved. But the shadows tell another story. Hints in royal traditions, forgotten tombs, and obscure coats of arms suggest the Templars did not perish. They adapted. Some accounts whisper that a few Templar survivors fled north, finding refuge among noble families. There they buried their relics and concealed their knowledge in secret customs passed down through generations. Over time, their presence blurred into legend, their blood interwoven with lines of power, and among those veiled names hidden in plain sight was one family that would one day reign over Britain, the House of Windsor. If these whispers hold truth, Queen Elizabeth was not merely a monarch, she was a protector. Strange coincidences cluster around her reign like mist: her fascination with ancient orders of knighthood, a discreet visit to Malta in 1947, where an unverified letter surfaced referencing the Queen of the Temple, and her coronation robe adorned with symbolic embroidery that scholars still debate to this day. She was the longest reigning sovereign in British history, a pillar of stability and grace. Yet beneath the calm exterior, was she guarding something older, something sacred? Look at the symbols that surrounded her life. The Order of the Garter, Britain's most prestigious order of chivalry, echoes curiously close to Templar imagery. Its motto, Honi soit qui mal y pense, translates to, "Shamed be he who thinks evil of it." An odd defense, isn't it? If there were no secrets to protect, why such a warning? Look closer, and you'll see red crosses stitched into ceremony robes, roses aligned in near-perfect symmetry, and rituals performed with silent precision, never explained, never altered, simply preserved. You may never have come across it, but a name lingers in the private archives of certain secretive historians: Regina Templi, the Queen of the Temple. The title first appeared in a coded prayer, preserved in 15th century Scotland. Since then, it has surfaced again and again throughout the centuries, always linked to female monarchs marked by destiny and mystery. Some dismiss it as poetic embellishment, others believe it to be an honor passed down in secret, bestowed upon women whose lineage carries the blood once protected by the Templar Order. Among those thought to belong to this sacred line are Eleanor of Aquitaine, Mary, Queen of Scots, and some claim Elizabeth II herself. But did she know? Or was it a truth felt, not spoken? A burden passed through ritual rather than revelation. To rule for 70 years is to learn the language of silence, and Elizabeth mastered silence like few ever have. She spoke sparingly, and when she did, her words were deliberate, measured, and careful. To most, that was royal discipline, but to others, it was the self-control of someone born into a line that survived by never revealing itself. Whispers suggest that in her youth, Elizabeth took part in ceremonies never recorded in official histories, rituals echoing the old Templar initiations, oaths sworn under candlelight, relics touched by hand sworn to secrecy, vows recited in ancient tongues long forgotten by all but the initiated. Imagine it, a young princess beneath the vaulted ceilings of Windsor, listening as sacred words older than her kingdom were spoken once more. Did she sense their weight? Did she feel pride? Fear, or the heavy understanding that some truths can only exist in silence? When Elizabeth visited Malta in 1947, she was not yet a queen, only a young woman engaged to a naval officer. The island still bore the scars of war, its chapels darkened by smoke and sorrow. Yet Malta had once been the stronghold of the Knights Hospitaller, the spiritual heirs of the Templar. There, among ruins and relics, a British officer reportedly found a sealed envelope hidden within the rubble of a collapsed crypt. Its full contents were never made public, but one fragment survived in private correspondence. It spoke of a woman who would guard the temple without blade, whose crown would hide a cross unseen. Coincidence perhaps, or a quiet coronation of another kind? If the mystery surrounding Queen Elizabeth II and the Templar secret has caught your curiosity, stay with us. Subscribe to History to Sleep, leave a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is there. And if this story stirs your imagination, share it. Because in a world where history is written by victors and legends are buried under centuries of dust, your attention might be the only torch left to keep these questions alive. The crown has passed, but the whisper remains. And within that whisper, a name, Regina Templar. What would you do if you discovered your own family had guarded something sacred for 700 years? Would you reveal it to the world or protect it, hiding truth behind ceremony and silence, beneath a diamond crown? Perhaps Elizabeth wasn't safeguarding just a nation, but a secret, a key. In 1947, just months before her engagement to Philip was made public, Elizabeth travelled to Malta. That same year, a British officer uncovered a sealed envelope in the ruins of a Templar chapel. Its contents were never officially released, but one line was said to have survived, whispered later by a dying priest. The Queen has risen again. She bears no sword, but guards the temple still. And so this story begins, not with a declaration, but with a question. A mystery older than empire, buried beneath marble and silence. A red cross, fading but never forgotten. This is not the history found in textbooks. It is the thread that moves through the shadows. The Queen may be gone, but her blood could still whisper through time. Are you listening? The story of Queen Elizabeth II's rumoured Templar connection can't be grasped without first travelling back to the 12th century, when a small band of knights in Jerusalem took sacred vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their mission was humble, to protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads to the Holy Land. Yet from those modest beginnings rose one of the most powerful and enigmatic orders in history. The Knights Templar grew into a force that shaped empires, influenced rulers, and quietly redefined faith and finance across Europe. Their emblem, the red cross on white, was more than a symbol of battle. It was a code, a sign of sacrifice, purity, and devotion. Jerusalem at that time was a city of dust and devotion, where the scent of incense mingled with the heat of the desert and banners of crusaders rippled under the sun. The Templars claimed their quarters atop the ruins of Solomon's Temple, a choice that gave them their name, and according to persistent legend, their secret. Some say beneath those ruins, they uncovered something extraordinary. Perhaps relics from the Age of Kings. Perhaps manuscripts that challenged the power of the Church. Perhaps even the bloodline of a sacred descent. Whatever truth hides there, one thing is certain, their rise was breathtaking. Within a few decades, the Templars were not just knights, they were bankers, administrators and trusted agents across Europe. Kings borrowed from them, nobles relied on them, pilgrims entrusted their fortunes to them. Their influence became both indispensable and dangerous. Monarchs recognized the order as an ally and a threat. In England, the Plantagenets found both sanctuary and strength in the Templars. King John, facing rebellion and uncertainty, even deposited the crown jewels with them in London for safekeeping. And when the order was destroyed in France, the English crown hesitated, moving slower and softer. Was it mercy or protection born from obligation, perhaps from shared bloodlines or hidden debts? It is within this uncertainty that the whispers surrounding Elizabeth's alleged inheritance find their echo. Royalty, in the medieval mind, ruled not merely by power, but by divine legitimacy, to carry relics, to claim sacred descent, to guard ancient oaths. These were the foundations of divine right, and the Templars, with their mysteries of Jerusalem, provided that invisible armor. If even a fragment of their line endured, carried within noble families, then the monarchy itself might bear its mark, unseen, but alive. The Wars of the Roses in the 15th century make this idea clearer. The red rose and the white rose, two emblems clashing on blood-soaked fields across England. Yet those roses carried deeper meaning than dynastic rivalry. To the Templars, the rose had symbolized secrecy and divine symmetry. Sub rosa under the rose was a phrase that meant silence, confidentiality, and sacred knowledge. So when Henry Tudor married Elizabeth of York and united the two roses into one, was it merely political unity, or the merging of two ancient lines, fragments of an inheritance whispered to reach back to the temple itself? Such questions never appear in official chronicles, yet their symbols echo endlessly through history. By the 16th century, silence had become survival. The fires of heresy burned hot, and secrecy was the only refuge for those preserving forbidden traditions. Still, the patterns continued. The Tudors celebrated chivalric orders. The Stuarts were fascinated by geometry, divine proportion, and sacred architecture. Through every generation, noble families interwove through marriage, passing on crests, rituals, and symbols, threads that to the untrained eye seemed decorative but may have carried meaning too ancient to name. When the Hanoverians arrived, and the royal line evolved into the modern House of Windsor, the crown carried within it centuries of layered inheritance, some known, some forgotten, some deliberately obscured. If any fragment of Templar lineage had survived and woven itself into that tapestry, it would be invisible, disguised in custom and ceremony. Yet it would live, within oaths, symbols, and expectations so subtle they felt like tradition. Imagine being born into such a heritage, surrounded by relics of monarchs and saints, by banners marked with stars and crosses, by the quiet rituals of royal life. You grow up learning which patterns hold meaning, which words are never repeated outside the family walls. You are trained to understand silence as duty, to recognize symbols not as ornament but as language. For Elizabeth, raised in Windsor Castle, surrounded by centuries of history and ritual, could her royal education have been more than patriotic pride? Could it have been the continuation of a legacy, one reaching back to the Knights of the Temple themselves? One detail often overlooked is the Order of the Garter, founded in 1348 by King Edward III. Its timing is intriguing. Just a few decades after the destruction of the Templar Order, its design mirrored many of the same principles, a secretive brotherhood of knights bound by honor, duty, and oath. Its structure, its symbols, even its rituals carried the same air of sacred exclusivity. The emblem, the garter itself, became a mark of secrecy and discretion, while its motto, Honisoaki Malipans, did more than warn against judgment. It seemed to cloak the order in deliberate mystery. Was this new fellowship a convenient replacement, or a vessel designed to carry the Templar spirit through the centuries under royal protection? Every English monarch since has served as its sovereign head. Elizabeth wore its star and sash proudly, often seen at ceremonies steeped in ancient tradition. Yet, she never spoke of its deeper meaning. Was it simply pageantry to her, or an inheritance too old to discuss openly? Secrecy, after all, is not the same as absence. It is strategy. The Templars mastered that art, embedding meaning in symbols, architecture, and ritual. Their red cross still appeared in churches long after their suppression, resurfacing quietly in coats of arms, carved stone, and the subtle geometry of chapels. Over time, these signs became the invisible language of those who remembered. In England, traces of this symbolism filtered through noble houses and institutions. A rose carved above a doorway, a star engraved on a tomb, a phrase woven into a royal oath. For most, these details meant nothing, heritage without context. But, for a select few, they might still have carried ancient resonance. By the time Elizabeth ascended the throne, those echoes may have become little more than ceremony to many. Yet she embodied them with a stillness that made people wonder if she understood something others did not. The story of the Templars, then, is not simply about medieval crusades. It is a story of endurance, of how faith, secrecy, and power survived through disguise. From the desert winds of Jerusalem to the quiet gardens of Windsor, a chain of symbols stretches unbroken through time, and at its end stood a queen who ruled longer than any before her, cloaked in ritual silence and grace. Was she merely fulfilling her duty, or guarding a secret that began 7 centuries ago? The autumn air of Paris in 1307 was sharp and cold, stinging the lungs and carrying with it the smell of wood smoke and fear. Before dawn broke on Friday, the 13th of October, the king's soldiers spread through the narrow streets, their boots striking wet cobblestones slick with dew. Their orders were precise and absolute. Arrest every knight of the temple. By sunrise, the proud order that had once defended Jerusalem and Acre was in chains, its members dragged from monasteries and fortresses across France. Torches flared in the darkness as doors splintered open. Warriors who had once fought for Christ now found themselves bound, accused, and betrayed. Their possessions were seized, their prayers silenced. Some pleaded their innocence, others said nothing at all. Chroniclers later wrote that many accepted their fate in eerie calm, as though they knew this was not an ending, but a transformation. The charges were damning: heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable rites. But the truth behind their downfall was far more human. King Philip V of France was deep in debt to the Templars. By branding them heretics, he could erase what he owed and seize their fortune. Yet beneath his politics, something darker stirred. If the Templars truly held relics or knowledge that could challenge the throne or the church, then this was not just vengeance, it was erasure. Among those captured was the Grand Master himself, Jacques de Morlaix. Imprisoned for years, he was finally led to a slow-burning pyre in 1314. As flames consumed him, he called upon God to judge both the Pope and the King before the year's end. Strangely, both men were dead within months. From that moment, whispers began that the Templars carried not only riches, but a power older and far more mysterious than anyone imagined. France rejoiced at their destruction, but the rest of Europe hesitated. In Portugal, the order quietly resurfaced under a new name, the Order of Christ. Their properties remained intact, their knights reborn under royal favour. In Scotland, where Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated, stories tell of fugitive Templars finding sanctuary. Legends even claim they rode with Bruce at Bannockburn in 1314, appearing like ghosts on horseback to turn the tide of battle. History cannot prove it, but the myth endured. And then there were the ships. The Templars maintained a fleet at La Rochelle on France's western coast. On the very night the arrests began, those ships vanished. No one ever found them. Some say they sailed north to Scotland. Others believe they went to Portugal or to Malta, where the Hospitallers would later rule. A few claim they fled farther still, across uncharted seas. Whatever their destination, their disappearance became one of history's quietest absences. Silence, after all, was the Templars' shield. Here lies the core of the mystery. If that vanished fleet carried more than gold, if it carried the guardians of a sacred legacy, then those men and the families who sheltered them became protectors of something far greater than treasure. Their descendants, hidden within Scotland, Portugal, and perhaps beyond, would have intertwined with noble houses through marriage and blood, quietly preserving what the fire was meant to destroy. Over time, their influence could have flowed into the great dynasties of Europe. The Plantagenets, the Tudors, and eventually the Windsors might all carry threads of this silent inheritance. If that were true, Elizabeth II's reign would represent not only royal continuity, but the survival of a secret that began when the flames rose in Paris. When Elizabeth was crowned in 1953, she stood beneath the arches of Westminster Abbey, surrounded by light, incense, and relics older than nations. The moment was steeped in ritual, every gesture traced back through centuries of monarchy and faith. But what if those rituals carried echoes of something older? Something that began not with kings, but with knights sworn to guard divine mysteries. Jacques de Molay's death was intended as a warning, yet his fire did not end the Templars. It concealed them. The ashes of that night scattered across Europe, seeding stories, bloodlines, and beliefs. Imagine the silence that followed as dawn broke over Paris. No banners, no brotherhood, only embers glowing faintly beneath the wind. Yet those embers never died. Kings feared what had been lost, or perhaps what had survived. Were the relics hidden? Was the knowledge preserved? No one knew. And that uncertainty, haunting, dangerous, eternal, has endured through the centuries. Records vanished, archives were sealed, and family lines blurred into myth. When the young Princess Elizabeth walked the ruins of Malta in 1947, she stepped on ground once ruled by knights who inherited the Templar spirit. Did she feel it then? The cold stones beneath her feet, the silence of chapels lit by a single candle. Perhaps she didn't know what she was touching, or perhaps she felt the faint echo of something she was born to protect. Legacies don't always survive in words. Sometimes they live in the blood, waiting for history to need them again. Some historians point to elements in Elizabeth's coronation that mirror ancient Templar vows: the anointing of hands, the oaths spoken in shadow, the relics touched in silence. Most dismiss them as tradition, but to those who listen closely, the coronation sounded less like ceremony and more like initiation. Maybe she never questioned it. Maybe she didn't need to, because duty and secrecy often speak the same language. That, perhaps, is the final secret of 1307, that the temple was never destroyed, only hidden. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay didn't end an order, they forced it underground. The purge was meant to erase the Brotherhood from memory. Yet what followed feels less like extinction and more like transformation. Records vanished, ships disappeared, bloodlines blurred, and history itself grew silent in all the right places, as though someone had ensured survival through disappearance. Across Europe, noble families of influence and wealth opened their doors to fugitive knights. Some took them in as humble monks or household advisors. Others, according to quiet tradition, bound themselves to the Templar cause by marriage, folding bloodlines together like threads in an invisible tapestry. These unions created lineages that carried not only wealth but knowledge, fragments of wisdom preserved in secrecy for generations. In Scotland, the Sinclair family of Rosslyn stands at the heart of that speculation. Their 15th century chapel is a stone puzzle of carved roses, stars, and intricate geometries. Designs scholars say reflect Templar iconography. Some even claim Rosslyn Chapel was built as a coded archive, its walls concealing secrets written in stone. The Sinclairs, loyal to Robert the Bruce and connected by legend to the exiled Knights of Bannockburn, held influence across centuries. Could their blood have eventually mingled with the royal line? Some genealogists hint at it, though the records as always fall silent exactly where truth should begin. Across the Channel, another name surfaces: the De Veres, the ancient Earls of Oxford. For generations they served as hereditary chamberlains to England's kings, ever close to the crown and its secrets. Some claim that when the Templars were dissolved, families like the De Veres quietly absorbed their traditions and lore, keeping them alive beneath layers of duty and discretion. One lost manuscript, long rumored but never verified, supposedly contains veiled references to the blood of the temple. Whether fact or fable, the whisper persists. Even the Plantagenets, England's ruling dynasty at the time of the suppression, seemed reluctant to destroy the Templars as France demanded. King Edward II delayed, hesitated, softened his orders. Some said it was weakness. Others saw obligation, perhaps even loyalty. That hesitation, whatever its cause, created space for remnants of the order to endure. If those remnants found safe harbor in noble houses, they could have slipped easily into later dynasties: the Tudors, the Stuarts, the Hanoverians, and finally the Windsors. Royal bloodlines are rivers, always merging, always shifting. Within that flow, a single hidden current could pass unseen for centuries, carrying something more precious than gold: identity. Elizabeth II inherited that river in full. Her lineage traced through German dukes, Scottish clans, and English kings, a network of ancestry stretching deep into medieval soil. Historians call it politics and marriage, but for those who look beneath the surface, it might be something else: a map of echoes, a silent trail of the temple's surviving flame. Consider her coronation in 1953. Elizabeth was anointed not only as monarch, but as guardian of something older than any kingdom. The ceremony's precision, its ancient oaths and gestures, carried layers of meaning forgotten by most who watched. The archbishop's whispered words, the relics placed in her hands, the anointing oil said to follow an unbroken formula from medieval times, all echoed rites long associated with the Knights Templar. Many historians dismiss these similarities as coincidence or lingering pageantry. Yet, to others, the ritual feels like a continuation, an initiation masked as monarchy. Guardianship doesn't always pass through blood alone. It can move through symbols, orders, and institutions that outlast nations. After the Templars fell, their spirit lived on through others. The Knights Hospitaller of Malta chief among them. Their emblem, their code, even their fortresses carried the same DNA of chivalric secrecy. And when a young Elizabeth walked the ruins of Malta in 1947, she stepped quite literally upon the stones where that legacy survived, in new form. Was it chance, or was it tradition circling back upon itself? The theory grows stranger still. Some claim that within Britain's nobility exists a hidden circle, sworn to protect not relics of stone, but a living relic, a person believed to embody the sacred lineage of the temple. If that legend holds any truth, then Elizabeth's rise was not only political destiny, but spiritual fulfillment. She would be both crown and chalice, the vessel of a secret 7 centuries old. Whether she knew or not remains the question. Some say only a select few are told, bound by silence before the throne. Others believe the truth is never spoken, only felt. Perhaps Elizabeth never needed to ask. Every protector has purpose. For some, it is loyalty. For others, power. And for a chosen few, it is reverence. A devotion to something sacred, unseen, but enduring. Across centuries, those motives blend until they are indistinguishable. Yet one thread remains clear through every whisper, every emblem, and every shadow that touches the crown. Silence itself is the shield of truth. Whatever endured of the Templar order was not discarded. It was woven into the cloth of nobility, into fellowships like the Garter, into rites that outlived the reasons they were first created. By the time Elizabeth II took the throne, those remnants no longer showed themselves to untrained eyes. They had become custom. They had become ceremony. They had become murmurs beneath robes of state. If Elizabeth inherited a hidden legacy, she also inherited the long chain of guardians, who risked names and lives to keep it intact. Every marriage, every vow, every motion performed without explanation may have been one link in an unbroken line, stretching back to the fall of the temple. The houses that sheltered her inheritance, the orders that veiled it, the quiet agendas that tended it together, they form strands of a tapestry whose pattern refuses to reveal itself. The stewards are gone, their signatures fading into the archives, yet the pulse they protected may still move in the hush of memory, carried by a sovereign whose reign was both display and disguise. History, stripped of proclamations and polished portraits, becomes something else entirely, a mosaic of shadowed threads, half-names, and almost answers. And in Elizabeth II's case, there are fragments that do not sit neatly within the official tale. A web of emblems, of choices made without comment, of acts performed with deliberate restraint. Seen alone, each is ordinary. Taken together, they hint that something older was being kept. Something hidden in the open, too sacred for the page, and too persistent to die. So let us begin, not with a trumpet blast, but with a small hinge on which the door may turn. At Elizabeth's coronation in 1953, every lens in the world sought the spectacle of Westminster Abbey, but what came before the procession belonged to secrecy. In the anointing performed behind a canopy, guarded from the public gaze, Elizabeth was consecrated apart from cameras, apart even from curiosity. No footage exists. The oil, according to tradition, drew on a formula of biblical scent and symbol, frankincense, myrrh and other essences, with a lineage said to trace back to Jerusalem and lands once bound to the Crusade estates. The privacy, the ingredients, the choreography, all mirror, in echo if not in letter, the atmosphere of medieval initiations, once associated with the Knights Templar. Within the crown's most guarded moment, was the temple still speaking in a language only ritual remembers? Consider too the recurrence of certain emblems throughout Elizabeth's life, many older than the British monarchy itself, many resonant with chivalric tradition. The Red Cross of St. George, a national standard, was also the Templar sign. The rose, especially the white, appears again and again in royal imagery. In Templar lore it stands for silence and secrecy. The vow, sub rosa, the 5-pointed star, carved into chapels and worked into regalia, belongs to the grammar of sacred geometry. Its angles, some say, encode wisdom passed along private lines. Coincidence, perhaps, but the pattern repeats often enough, consistently enough, to resist easy dismissal. One of the most intriguing clues does not lie in gold or stone, but in paper. In the late 1990s, archivists quietly catalogued a series of long-sealed letters from the royal collection, never fully released to the public. Among them was one addressed to Queen Mary, Elizabeth's grandmother, written in 1910 by a retired Anglican bishop named Wilfrid Vincent. In it, he described a vision he claimed to have experienced while praying in the ruins of an old Templar chapel in Wiltshire. He wrote of seeing a great woman bearing the seal of the cross, standing between two pillars of flame. He took it as a vision of Britain's divine destiny, a queen who would rise from the ashes of war to guard a hidden truth. The letter was dismissed as poetic fantasy, yet believers in the Templar lineage theory view it differently, as prophecy, or perhaps as a memory coded into metaphor. The chapel where that vision occurred adds to the mystery. Though ruined by the Reformation, its walls still carry carvings nearly identical to those found in Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, and in ancient Templar sites across France. 8 pointed stars, 13 petaled roses, and sword-bearing angels whose eyes are closed. The stone seems to hum with meaning too deliberate to be coincidence. It is not proof, but it is presence, a pattern beneath the surface, a whisper behind the veil. And then come the stories of Elizabeth's visit to Malta in 1947. She was only 21, not yet crowned, accompanying her fiancé, Prince Philip, who was stationed there as a naval officer. Officially, it was an ordinary stay. Unofficially, it left behind questions. Several Maltese historians noted that she visited the ruins of the Chapel of Our Lady of Victory, built by the Knights of St. John, the spiritual heirs of the Templars. An unpublished diary from a priest who guided her visit recounts how she stopped before a stone relief of a knight crowning a woman beneath a crescent moon. She stared for some time, he wrote. When I offered to explain, she motioned for silence. Her hand traced the shape of the sword. What passed through her mind in that moment? Reverence, curiosity, or recognition? No one can say. Decades later, a damaged manuscript was discovered hidden behind an altar in the same chapel, sealed within a wooden box. The text, mostly destroyed by water, preserved a few haunting words in Latin. The bloodline continues. The crown is her shield, the secret, her burden. Historians still debate its origin. Officially, it bears no connection to the monarchy. Yet its date around 1687 places it in an era when royal and Templar legends were deeply entwined through Masonic and chivalric traditions. And what of the Order of the Garter? Britain's most prestigious chivalric brotherhood, founded in 1348, mirrors Templar hierarchy almost too closely. Limited membership, private rituals, and ceremonies steeped in secrecy. Every sovereign since Edward III has presided as its head. Elizabeth was no exception. What is less discussed, however, is that many of its rituals unfold in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, a site whose association with the Templar myth has lingered for centuries. Along its banners and crests appear ancient symbols, crossed swords, roses within stars, towers wrapped in flame. Are they merely heraldic flourishes, or remnants of something preserved intentionally, hiding in the open? Viewed alone, these details seem scattered, even harmless. But when drawn together, they begin to form the faint outline of a shadow map. A queen visiting Templar ruins before her reign. A coronation echoing ancient initiation rites. Lifelong ties to secretive orders and forgotten symbols. Letters, manuscripts, reliefs, each a quiet mark left behind. The pattern does not proclaim itself, it whispers, softly, insistently, from stone, from banner, from silence. Long before Queen Elizabeth II was crowned, before the very idea of a British Empire existed, there were already places across the land that seemed to breathe with unspoken memory. They were never declared sacred, yet those who passed through them could feel it. The difference in the air, the stillness that clung to the stones, the faint hum beneath the silence. Some said prayers lingered longer in those ruins. Others claimed they could feel the watchers, those who came before, standing just beyond the veil of time. These were not simply remnants of history, they were reminders, places where the past refused to rest. One such place lies in Hertfordshire, where the ruins of Temple Dinsley sleep beneath centuries of rebuilding. Once a Templar preceptory, the land passed through noble hands after the order's suppression. Over generations, the structure was reshaped, renamed, and nearly forgotten. Yet one room remained unchanged, a small chamber lined with red chalkstone deep beneath the house. At its center lies a circle of 8 tiles surrounding a single, worn star. Some say the design is the seal of Solomon. Others call it an ancient compass rose. In 1936, workers renovating the cellar lifted the central tile and found a copper medallion engraved with a crowned rose pierced by a sword. The artifact was quietly taken away, its existence never publicly acknowledged. A historian who photographed it before its removal described it as ceremonial, unsettling, belonging to no known heraldry. On its edge, a faint date was etched. It was a year with no recorded connection to the Templars or the crown. Yet in that same year, Princess Anne, later Queen Anne, visited the region while suffering from illness. She stayed, not in London, but at a nearby estate built on former Templar land. Records note that her recovery was sudden and unexplained. In a letter preserved by her confessor, she reportedly spoke in dreams of red stars and buried guardian, dismissed as delirium perhaps. But the medallion, found centuries later on the same property, suggests her dreams may have been something else, remembrance rather than madness. Far to the north, Scotland keeps its own secrets within Rosslyn Chapel, long linked to the Sinclair family. During restoration in the late 1800s, workers uncovered a sealed chamber. It was never opened publicly. The Earl at the time ordered it remain untouched until a time of clarity. The event drew little attention, but during World War II a coded British transmission mentioned something unusual. Rosslyn Protocol, transfer of relics confirmed. Most historians dismiss it as a military code name. Yet, Rosslyn, not Rosslyn, has a curious resonance. A name, a line, a map perhaps, stretching through blood and time. That same decade, King George VI, the Queen's father, travelled to Scotland under the guise of a hunting trip. For 3 days he stayed near Rosslyn with only a few advisors and clergy. There are no official records of the visit. Locals later recalled strange nocturnal activity at the chapel. Lights moving at impossible hours, covered carts rumbling across the grounds, and a small procession of hooded figures walking silently beneath the arches. If it was merely ceremony, why the secrecy? And why, just a few years later, was Elizabeth herself brought to that same place before her marriage? Artifacts whisper. So do walls. But paper leaves louder echoes. In 2002, behind a false panel in the royal apartments at Windsor, restorers found a sealed envelope marked with the insignia of the Order of the Garter and dated Inside was a parchment and a thin strip of silk embroidered with 3 symbols, a rose, a sword, and a crescent moon. The text, still unreleased, is said to be written in an older tongue, difficult to translate. One line, however, has been deciphered. She shall guard the truth in silence, even as the stars fall. Whether prophecy or oath, the words sound less like devotion and more like instruction. YouTube script rewrite said, there is another place, lesser known yet far more persistent, where whispers refuse to fade. On the western coast of Wales stands a weathered ruin. Locals call the Silent Chapel. Its origins are unknown, its name unofficial, but the legend surrounding it has endured through generations. The roof has long since fallen, ivy veiling the stone, yet the altar remains intact, and on that altar, carved deep into the rock and nearly hidden beneath moss, lies a symbol rarely seen outside ancient esoteric texts. A vertical sword piercing an open rose, flanked by 2 6-pointed stars. The image is both sacred and hauntingly feminine. Perhaps the chapel was never meant for a king, but for a guardian, a queen who protected not power but memory. In local folklore, a woman once came to that chapel each spring, dressed not in royal garments, but in mourning black. She would sit before the altar for hours, never speaking, always alone. No name was ever confirmed, but an old groundskeeper's journal from 1965 bears a simple line. She came again, looks like the Queen. No guards this time. Left something beneath the stone. Decades later, when asked about the entry, the groundskeeper only said, if it wasn't her, then she had a sister no one ever told us about. Not all mysteries wear crowns. Some wear silence. Taken together, these fragments, a medallion with no crest, a sealed chamber left unopened, a parchment written in forgotten script, a chapel visited in secret, form a constellation of secrets that refuses to dim. They may not prove a bloodline, but they point toward preservation, intention, guardianship. In a world where records can be sealed and history polished smooth, it is the rough edges that tell the truth. As you follow these traces through dust-filled corridors, through crypts and archives, you begin to see a shape emerging, not one that declares, but one that waits. Perhaps what was buried was never meant to be hidden at all. Perhaps it was waiting to be remembered. You walk slowly now. The passage narrows. The walls are cold, damp with age. The stones do not speak. Yet something hums beneath their silence. Not voices, not ghosts, but memory. It follows like the faint scent of candle wax, like velvet singed by time. Somewhere beyond these stones, they walked the ones who carried the line forward. There is a theory, whispered in Masonic halls and genealogical archives alike, that the Templars did not perish in fire, but survived through ritual. The logic is simple. Truth once spoken can be silenced. Truth preserved in symbol and action can live forever. What could not be written was woven instead into practice, into ceremony, into blood. In the generations that followed, these hidden traditions evolved under new names: orders of chivalry, oaths of honor, dynasties of duty. The Templar flame, if it survived, did so not in stone, but in flesh. Across Europe, traditions still carry the unmistakable fingerprints of Templar origin. In Portugal, the Order of Christ, founded just after the Templars were declared heretical, preserved much of their structure, their rituals, even their red cross. Prince Henry the Navigator was a member, and under that same symbol, Portuguese ships set sail to chart the edges of the world. Centuries after the Brotherhood was dissolved, their emblem still fluttered on sails that circled the globe. The faith that had once marched through Jerusalem now steered caravels across oceans. It did not die, it transformed. In Scotland, the papal decree against the Templars was never enforced. Exiled knights found refuge among clans loyal to Robert the Bruce, who had himself been cast out by Rome. Legends tell that they rode with him at Bannockburn, turning the tide of battle with a silent, spectral charge. Whether truth or myth, what followed is certain. They stayed, they built chapels marked by cryptic geometry, passed rites through trusted allies, and married into families that would one day feed blood into the veins of Britain's future royalty. From this soil, the legend claims, the hidden lineage took root, its sap flowing quietly through centuries of nobility. Certain emblems appear again and again in these places. The Red Cross, of course, but also the twin pillars, the compass rose, the five-pointed star, and the rose within a circle. One symbol, especially persistent, is the rose pierced by a sword, a mark of secrecy, sacrifice, and sacred burden. It decorates gravestones in remote Scottish glens, beams in Welsh chapels, and the folded garments of the Order of the Garter. Its origin is unclaimed, yet its endurance speaks volumes. Among the most mysterious of these inherited customs is the Vigil of the Rose, a nocturnal ritual described in a handful of 17th century journals and letters. Once every generation, a chosen woman of noble blood was said to stand within a circle of salt and roses, cloaked in black. Elders of her house surrounded her, speaking no words. Into her hands they placed a single object, a ring, a medallion, sometimes a small ceremonial blade, and left her in silence until dawn. No explanation, no written law. The meaning was passed only through presence. Memory became the message. Was Elizabeth ever chosen for such a vigil? Her biographers make no mention of it, but then again, they wouldn't. What survives in shadow was never meant for record. Those searching royal archives for proof will find nothing. That is the point. Survival of the temple's legacy, if it exists, depended not on open declaration, but on ritual disguised as tradition, on silence disguised as decorum. Another theory suggests the survival was not only spiritual but physical. The bloodline itself carried forward in secret. Researchers tracing medieval genealogies find threads that lead from fugitive Templar knights in Scotland and Portugal into later noble houses. Sinclair, Montague, De Vere families that intermarried with aristocracy and eventually with royalty. If true, the lineage would be matrilineal as much as noble, passed through women as much as warriors. This fits with certain esoteric Templar principles, which held that the feminine embodied the vessel of divine continuity. They spoke of the hidden queen, a guardian who would never rule by decree, but by preservation. She would not command armies but protect remembrance. She would appear serene, ordinary, human, yet within her would live the memory of fire and faith. Some now look to Elizabeth II through that lens. Her reserve, her composure, her silence were often described as coldness, but perhaps they were not detachment, they were discipline. She did not reveal what she was meant to guard. Throughout her reign, she moved with a precision that felt less personal than ceremonial. Every brooch, every chapel, every word measured. It was not performance, it was remembrance, and there were moments, brief, fleeting, half-seen, when the veil seemed to lift. Just enough to let the echo of something older slip through. A quiet visit to a Templar graveyard in Devon, unannounced and unphotographed. A private donation to help restore Rosslyn Chapel. given without signature but later traced to her personal fund. A handwritten letter sent to the Grand Master of the Order of Malta in 2007, commemorating the 700th anniversary of the Templar suppression. Its message remains sealed, but archivists who handled it spoke of reverence in its tone, almost a farewell. None of these gestures were publicized. They live only in footnotes, private ledgers, local recollections, yet when aligned they form a pattern as deliberate as a carved sigil. Follow those signs and a path emerges. A road that begins in Jerusalem, bends through Portugal and the coasts of France, climbs into the mists of Scotland, and ends beneath the quiet arches of Windsor and Balmoral. It is less a road of geography than of memory, and at its end stands not an order, but a woman. Imagine her, the young Elizabeth, tracing those old corridors, standing in chapels where her ancestors once knelt. Each relic, each ritual, each stone around her carrying more meaning than words could contain. Perhaps she never needed to be told what she was guarding. Perhaps she simply knew, because not all inheritances are spoken. Some are lived. The story of the Templars, after all, has never truly been about swords and treasure. It has always been about endurance of belief, of silence, of memory. When the flames of 1307 died out, the Brotherhood's legacy slipped into bloodlines, architecture, and ritual. The cross became embroidery, the vows became etiquette, the secrecy became tradition. For 7 centuries that transformation continued, through the Sinclairs of Scotland, through the Stuarts, through the Hanovers, until at last, through the House of Windsor. By the time Elizabeth was born, the Templar flame no longer burned in cathedrals or crusades. It burned quietly within the heart of a monarchy defined by ritual and restraint. Her silence was not emptiness. It was inheritance, the art of carrying a truth too fragile to name. History does not survive by accident. What endures is what someone somewhere chose to protect. When stories vanish, it is never by chance. They are buried with purpose, or hidden behind ritual. The tale of the Templars, and the theory of a bloodline carried into modern royalty, could not have lasted on rumor alone. It would have required guardians, individuals, and alliances working quietly across generations to preserve what could not be spoken. Whispers of such protectors persist. Small factions hidden within aristocracy, religious orders, and secret societies, some guided by faith, others by ambition, and a few perhaps by fear of what truth might undo. Among the most visible yet least understood of these circles stands the Order of the Garter. Founded in 1348, during the reign of Edward III, it remains Britain's highest and most exclusive order of chivalry. Its structure mirrors the Templar Brotherhood with uncanny precision. A fixed number of members, private oaths, ceremonies laced with ancient symbolism. Its regalia, swords, stars, garters, and circles recall the geometry that once defined the temple itself. Elizabeth II presided over the order for her entire reign, choosing its members personally. If any modern thread of the old Templar network remained within royal reach, this would be its vessel. Yet the Garter is not alone. The Freemasons, long believed to be spiritual heirs of the Templars, carry their own echoes of sacred architecture and coded ritual. Though debate continues about the depth of that lineage, the overlap in symbolism is undeniable. Solomon's Temple, geometry of divine proportion, vows of silence and service. Each element reappears like a signature written through time. Several royals maintained close ties to these traditions. Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, served as Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England for decades. A lifelong Mason, he was also Elizabeth's cousin and confidant. The Queen herself, though never a member of any Masonic body, moved within its orbit, her public duties often intersecting with their ceremonies and patronages. Beyond these recognized institutions lie quieter, more elusive groups, the Order of the Rose Croix, the Order of the Secret Star, and other offshoots of mystical European traditions. Many claim descent from Templar initiates who safeguarded esoteric teachings through centuries of persecution. Their invocations speak not of conquest but of protection, of a Queen of Light, a feminine guardian who preserves divine memory when men of war fail. Whether poetry or prophecy, it is striking how these texts describe her, a sovereign by blood, a protector by silence. In the 20th century, several members of Britain's upper class were quietly linked to such esoteric circles, photographed at gatherings in Glastonbury, in Roslin, and even in Malta. The names rarely appeared in print, but their connections were real enough. scattered across letters, guest lists, and private collections. One name appears more than once: Mountbatten, Prince Philip's family line. Philip himself, fascinated by ancient cultures and mystic architecture, visited Rosslyn Chapel privately in the 1960s with a small delegation. No official record of the visit exists. Influence, in truth, rarely announces itself. It hides in continuity. Over the decades, individuals aligned with these traditions appeared in key royal roles: archivists, advisors, chaplains, and historians. Their presence ensured not change, but control, not revelation, but restraint. A soft shaping of narrative designed not to expose the secret, but to keep it intact. Even the language of monarchy carries its echo. In speeches across generations, certain phrases repeat: servant of sacred duty, defender of tradition, guardian of truth. Ceremonial words, yes, but also reflections of the inner Templar code: poverty, chastity, obedience. Those were vows for the outer order. The inner circle's trinity was different: secrecy, service, silence. A queen who lived 70 years beneath the world's gaze, yet revealed nothing of herself, did not contradict that code. She fulfilled it. Then there were the charities, the patronages, the subtle affiliations that Elizabeth chose throughout her reign. On the surface they seemed practical: hospitals, education, the arts. But a closer look reveals a quieter pattern. Many of her lesser-known associations connected directly to institutions devoted to preservation of architecture, of philosophy, of ancient music, and ritual. She was a patron of the Royal Institute of Philosophy, a supporter of the British School at Jerusalem, and an honorary sponsor of societies dedicated to restoring medieval chapels and safeguarding sacred art. Causes that, while outwardly cultural, mirrored the same purpose that once guided the Templar Creed: to preserve what others might forget. In every case, Elizabeth's involvement was dignified, almost detached. She lent her name, her presence, her quiet approval, but seldom her voice. That restraint may have seemed royal modesty, or perhaps it was guardianship, the deliberate silence of someone who knew what must never be spoken too clearly. The most persistent theory among esoteric historians is that the Templar legacy no longer lives in one order or secret brotherhood, but across many, each holding fragments of memory, each bound by a shared understanding rather than a single command. A decentralized web of continuity, kept alive not by control, but by vow. The Templar bloodline, if real, would have survived through time the same way their wisdom did, diffused across families, traditions, and rituals that outlasted explanation. If so, the monarchy itself, an institution built on ceremony, secrecy, and stability, was the perfect shield. Within its pageantry, within its ancient liturgies and oaths, the language of the temple could hide in plain sight, and Elizabeth II, both participant and protector, may have been its living fulcrum, the silent axis on which 7 centuries of continuity turned. For 70 years she held that role, never faltering, never exposing too much, never modernizing past a certain point. Those who believe the theory say this was not stubbornness, but fidelity. The task of preservation demands patience. Time, after all, is the only true ally of secrets. The crown itself, an unbroken inheritance, heavy with ritual and myth, became the vessel of that preservation. Elizabeth's reign, by this view, was less a monarchy and more a covenant, the final link in a chain older than the empire itself. The lingering question is not whether these hidden influences shaped her reign, they almost certainly did, but whether she shaped them in return. Did she carry the legacy knowingly, as guardian of something sacred, or did she embody it instinctively, a vessel moved by a destiny she never needed to define? If the Templar current flowed through her, then perhaps the alliances that protected it were not relics of the past. Perhaps they are still alive now, quiet, patient, watching, just as they always have. What survives must first survive erasure. History does not remain whole by kindness. It endures through protection, suppression, and careful curation. Every powerful story that threatens authority is not usually destroyed, but rewritten, its edges softened, its core hidden beneath official narrative. That was the fate of the Knights Templar, and perhaps of those who carried their legacy forward. If a sacred bloodline truly flowed through noble and royal veins, its survival would never have been announced. it would have been disguised, redacted, or removed from the record entirely. The Templar downfall began not with a sword, but with a pen. In 1307, under pressure from King Philip I of France, Pope Clement V issued a decree ordering the arrest of every Templar and the seizure of their lands. In a single stroke, the church turned from patron to predator. What followed was not justice, but fear. Trials built on torture, confessions forced under agony, archives burned to ash. By 1312, the order was officially dissolved, not because it was proven guilty, but because it had grown too wealthy, too independent, too untamed. Some say it had discovered truths that threatened both crown and cross. Yet, the command was not obeyed everywhere. Scotland ignored it. Portugal rebranded the order under a new name. England hesitated. King Edward II delayed his compliance, citing insufficient cause. Some knights were quietly released, others vanished into the folds of monastic life. The English trials, heavily redacted and fragmentary, read like a whisper trying to survive beneath the roar of censorship. Scholars believe the most revealing testimonies, those that hinted at secret knowledge or sacred inheritance, were removed entirely or locked within church archives, still sealed today. The centuries that followed only deepened the silence. When Henry VIII broke from Rome during the Reformation, monasteries and chapels once tied to the Templars were seized or destroyed, libraries burned, ledgers vanished. One example stands out: Temple Church in London, where effigies of knightly tombs once lay with swords crossed over their chests. During the looting, those stone faces were shattered, their inscriptions carved away. Officially it was anti-Catholic fervor, but others suspect a subtler motive: the erasure of memory, the burial of a thread connecting those tombs to royal blood. Erasure did not end with fire, it evolved into ink. In the 19th century, as interest in the occult and Templar history revived, a researcher named Thomas Langford claimed to have uncovered letters and codes, proving a secret line of guardians within noble bloodlines. He called them the Langford Papers. Before his findings could be published, Langford was found drowned in the Thames. His house burned the same night. Authorities called it an accident. The documents were never seen again. Later, in the 20th century, more files connected to Templar research quietly disappeared from national archives. One, titled Bloodline Holdings, Private Royal Trusts, 1610 to 1853, was removed from the public catalogue by When a journalist asked about it years later, the official reply was brief: no such file exists. Yet a declassified royal memo from the same period reads, "Ensure trust archives are not referenced in future indexing. Remove temple tags from estate files." The signature, redacted. Suppression leaves fingerprints. And then, once again, Malta. During Elizabeth's visit in 1947, a letter reportedly discovered in the ruins of a hospitaller chapel described a crowned woman who guards the temple in silence. When a local historian tried to publish it decades later, his office was broken into and the manuscript vanished. "They told me it would embarrass the crown," he said, "but I wrote nothing scandalous, only something forgotten." Even Elizabeth's official genealogy carries curious gaps. Entire branches leading to obscure Scottish and Central European houses with known Templar ties are omitted in modern charts. Those who try to trace them find burned estates, sealed archives, or records lost conveniently to war. The same names return like ghosts: Sinclair, Montague, De Vere, Neville, families that shaped history from the edges, always close to the throne, yet never quite at its center. And through it all, silence remained her final shield. Elizabeth never acknowledged these theories, never confirmed, never denied. To some, it was royal discretion. To others, it was discipline. The last echo of a vow that once demanded secrecy above all else. What is unspoken cannot be twisted. What is unwritten cannot be erased. If she carried the weight of a sacred inheritance, her silence was not avoidance. It was ritual, the last vow of a guardian bound by time and blood. In the end, the story that survives is the one shielded from both fire and ink. What has been erased still lingers in the gaps of ledgers, the margins of manuscripts, the vaults where redacted names sleep. The suppression of the Templar legacy, if it ever truly occurred, was never complete. Suppression implies fear, and fear always leaves residue. The louder the silence, the greater the secret it conceals. Perhaps that is why the echoes remain. The more history tried to bury the thread, the clearer its shape became through what was missing. In every gap, a faint outline. In every vanished record, a trace of deliberate omission. Sometimes what is left out speaks louder than what is written. Silence leaves ripples. It reshapes the surface of history, distorting reflections until truth becomes myth and myth becomes memory. Look closely at Elizabeth's reign through this lens, not just as sovereign, but as potential custodian of a secret centuries old, and certain moments shift in tone. Events once dismissed as coincidence take on weight. Decisions once attributed to decorum begin to feel like strategy. If she truly bore the burden of an ancient inheritance, then her 70 years on the throne were not only long, they were heavy. And where there is burden, there is consequence. In 1992, the Queen called it her annus horribilis, her terrible year. 3 royal marriages fell apart. A fire consumed Windsor Castle. The public's faith in the monarchy cracked. Officially, these were unconnected events, but among those who study the hidden side of royal history, one stands apart: the fire. It began in Queen Victoria's private chapel, a place thick with religious and symbolic imagery. The flames tore through centuries of heritage, devouring rooms rarely seen by the public. Among the losses was a small library said to contain manuscripts gifted to Victoria by German relatives involved in esoteric societies. The books were never catalogued. Some called the blaze an accident. Others whispered it was a cleansing, an intentional erasure. Fires erase, but they also protect. They remove what cannot be allowed to remain visible. Then came 1997, the death of Princess Diana, a tragedy that split the nation and cast a shadow over the House of Windsor. The official story is familiar: a car crash in a Paris tunnel, a driver's error, the end of a fairy tale. Yet the inconsistencies never faded. Cameras malfunctioned, reports changed, blood tests were disputed. Diana was buried quickly without a full independent inquiry. Conspiracy theories swarmed, but one question has lingered longer than the rest. What did she know? Some historians of the occult have suggested that Diana's marriage to Charles was more than political. It was genealogical, the union of 2 ancient bloodlines. If so, their son, Prince William, would represent a fusion of legacies, a symbolic joining of currents once kept apart. And if that is true, her death marked not only personal loss, but disruption of lineage, an interruption of continuity. Silence followed, deeper than before. The palace spoke little. The Queen did not appear for days. The public saw detachment. Perhaps it was something else, mourning for a fracture that could not be acknowledged. And then there was Margaret, Elizabeth's sister, spirited, rebellious, denied her first love. Peter Townsend. The official reason was propriety. He was divorced. But whispers claimed another motive, that his bloodline, obscure and unvetted, risked interfering with something far older than etiquette. Margaret's heartbreak became a shield, protecting what neither of them could name. Patterns repeat quietly in history. Fires, denials, forbidden unions. What if these were not random misfortunes, but ripples of preservation? The price of keeping a secret alive through centuries of danger and change. Even smaller moments take on new weight when seen through this hidden lens. In 2005, when Prince Charles married Camilla Parker Bowles, the ceremony was subdued, quiet, almost restrained, lacking the grandeur of previous royal weddings. Yet what caught the attention of symbolic historians wasn't what was seen, but where the blessing took place. St. George's Chapel at Windsor, the very heart of the Order of the Garter. Beneath those vaulted ceilings, generations of monarchs had been initiated, crowned and buried, each ceremony steeped in layers of ancient ritual. Charles's blessing there seemed more than convenience. To some, it marked the continuation of something sacred, a renewal of the covenant between the crown and the silent order it represents. Charles himself has long been drawn to mysticism and geometry, fascinated by sacred architecture, Islamic design, and the hidden mathematics of nature. He's spoken often of harmony, proportion, and divine balance, all principles once cherished by the Templars. His coronation years later echoed that fascination, blending Christian ritual with ancient symbolism. Whether by intention or inheritance, he seemed to walk in the same quiet patterns of meaning that had surrounded his mother's life. Elizabeth, too, left traces of deliberate choice throughout her reign. Her insistence on ancient forms of ceremony, a preference for traditional chaplains steeped in theology, outside mainstream Anglicanism, a continued restoration of medieval chapels, all hinted at a devotion to continuity. Some of her personal bishops studied biblical archaeology, others specialized in sacred architecture and apocryphal scripture. These were not casual appointments, they were careful selections, guided by knowledge deeper than routine. Even her public restraint may have been part of the preservation. Silence has always been the strongest language of guardianship. By saying nothing, she revealed everything, that the secret, whatever it was, would not be betrayed by her voice. Then came the archivists. In 2011, a scholar cataloguing estate records reportedly uncovered a misfiled ledger among 18th century documents in the Royal Archives. Inside were coded entries, symbols, not words, marking dates and locations of private gatherings on estates known for their Masonic or Templar heritage. Before the discovery could be verified, the scholar was reassigned, the file removed, and all inquiry halted. Months later, a small note appeared in the British Library catalogue: access restricted, pending review by royal authority. What did that ledger contain? A list of protectors? A calendar of rites? A map of the bloodline itself? No answer was ever given. The silence, once again, was total. But silence has its own sound. The longer it lingers, the louder it becomes. If Elizabeth truly bore a sacred inheritance, if she was trained from youth to carry something older than her crown, then her stillness was not coldness. It was discipline. Her distance not indifference, but reverence. She would have understood what her ancestors could not say aloud, that to speak the truth of a lineage born in fire and exile is to invite its destruction. The cost of keeping such a secret would not only be historical, it would be personal. Fires, deaths, forbidden loves, erased documents, even the careful choreography of her public life. Each might have been a ripple from the same hidden source, the preservation of a legacy that could not survive the light of day. YouTube script rewrite said, when the last Templar flame flickered into ash beneath Jacques de Molay's pyre, many believed the order had ended forever. But legends rarely die in fire, they transform. Some legacies do not march forward in armies or treaties. They move like whispers, reshaping themselves through centuries of silence. The Knights Templar became more than a brotherhood. They became an idea, a symbol of guardianship, of faith preserved against destruction, of silence as armor, and ideas once set loose never die, they adapt. Over the centuries that followed, the Templar image was recast by poets, philosophers, and secret societies. They appeared in paintings as ghostly warriors guarding sacred relics, in books as keepers of forbidden truths, in the songs and myths of Europe as silent riders watching from the edges of history. But one story grew louder than all the rest: the legend of the Grail. The Holy Grail has never had a fixed form. Some say it was a cup, the chalice from the Last Supper. Others insist it was never an object at all, but a lineage, blood made sacred through descent from divine origin. In this view, the Grail was not meant to be found, it was meant to be inherited. This interpretation, revived by modern writers and filmmakers, traces its roots far deeper. Ancient Gnostic texts spoke of wisdom carried in the vessel of flesh. Medieval poets like Wolfram von Eschenbach described the Grail not as gold, but as light incarnate, protected by a secret order of knights who served a hidden queen. If so, then the Grail was not an artifact of stone, but a bloodline guarded across generations. The theory suggests that after the fall of Jerusalem and the suppression of the Templars, fragments of that sacred lineage fled north into France, Scotland, Portugal, merging with noble families through strategic unions. Over time, the sacred and the secular became one, until the divine inheritance wore crowns instead of armor. Some genealogists point to curious intersections between the Merovingian line of early France and the later European houses of Stuart, Sinclair, and De Vere. These names surface again and again in Grail lore, not as metaphor, but as milestone, and woven through their branches runs a thread that eventually touches the modern British monarchy. By the 20th century, that thread reached Elizabeth II. The official story portrays her as a monarch of discipline and grace, a figure of duty in an age of change. Yet, beneath that public image lies another interpretation, that she represented the living Grail, not as myth, but as embodiment, a vessel of memory, a keeper of sacred equilibrium between faith and rule. The Grail, in every age, has symbolized wholeness, the divine made human, the eternal preserved through love and sacrifice. And in her long reign, Elizabeth became that symbol. Through war, collapse, and transformation, she stood immovable, a still point in the turning world. Perhaps it was temperament, or perhaps it was destiny. Some esoteric historians argue that she fulfilled an ancient prophecy. In certain Templar manuscripts, real or apocryphal, appears the phrase Regina Templari, the Queen of the Temple. She would not wield a sword, but silence. She would not lead armies, but guard memory. She would rule not through power, but through presence. Elizabeth never claimed that role. She never needed to. Her actions, her restraint, her very being seemed to echo it. Her coronation mirrored ancient anointings. Her words, carefully measured, invoked truths beyond politics. At Rosslyn, at Malta, at St. George's Chapel, she stood in the same spaces once tied to the guardians of that forgotten vow. Perhaps the myths were never about treasure or relics at all. Perhaps the Grail was always meant to be human, a living vessel for the sacred to continue. If so, Elizabeth carried it for 70 years, and when she passed, something more than a monarch was lost. A chapter closed, one that had begun with the crack of fire in 1307, and ended with the lowering of a crown in silence. And if the line truly ended with her, the question remains, who now carries the burden? Was the secret passed on in ritual, or did it vanish with her final breath? Some whisper that it rests with her grandson, William, a man already steeped in quiet symbolism, who has spoken of service as sacred duty and of preserving something unseen yet essential for the people. Others believe the line has been hidden again, concealed not by blood but by ceremony, transferred in silence to someone beyond public sight. There is one last story, a fragment of prophecy that has drifted through centuries like smoke. In the early 1600s, a German mystic named Johann Valentin Andrié wrote a series of strange texts known as the Rosicrucian Manifestos. Within them he described a future age when a royal descendant shall carry the flame of the old wisdom once more. She shall wear a crown of stars, yet her feet shall walk upon stone. Scholars called it allegory, mystics called it foresight. To some it foretold Elizabeth, a woman of royal blood, crowned in duty yet bound to earth in service, the living bridge between the sacred and the mortal. Whether by accident or design, the symmetry is haunting. Elizabeth's reign was a paradox of permanence and change, a living relic of a vanished world who managed to guide a modern one. And when she died, the reaction was not merely grief, it was reverence, as though the air itself had shifted. Something unspoken seemed to leave with her, something the world could feel but not name. Perhaps that was the last act of her guardianship to pass in silence, leaving only echoes. Because the impact of her reign cannot be measured in policies or headlines. It must be measured in what endures, in the sense that something ancient closed with her passing, something sacred that had quietly survived through her life. The Grail, if it exists, was never meant to be found. It was meant to be carried. And for 70 years, she carried it flawlessly. Now the stone stands cold again. The rose closes its petals. The sword sleeps in its sheath. But the echo remains. Somewhere, a door has not quite shut. You run your fingers across the rough edge of a carved stone. It's older than the castle around it, older than the chapel above. Beneath your hand, an indentation forms the faint outline of a rose. 5 petals. A single point at the center. You pull back, but its memory stays in your palm. You've seen it before, on royal crests, in cathedral windows, on coins worn smooth by centuries. You don't know its meaning, but you feel its pull. Symbols, after all, are the language of those who cannot speak openly. The Templars mastered that art. They left no open scripture, no proclamation, only geometry and mark. Their cross, their star, their spiral, each one a code that whispered across generations. And even as centuries turned, those same shapes began to appear again. This time, not in temples, but in thrones. Look closely at the coronation regalia, for example. Every object tells a story far older than the monarchy itself. The sovereign's orb, for instance, topped with a cross and encircled by a jeweled band, appears at first as a simple symbol of Christian authority, but its design echoes medieval Templar depictions of the world, a perfect sphere bound by divine order, balanced between heaven and earth. It is not just a royal ornament, it is geometry given meaning, the world held within the hand of one chosen to guard it. Then there is the Sword of Temporal Justice, presented during the ceremony. Upon its guard are roses and vines curling into a hexagonal form, a shape strikingly similar to the Seal of Solomon, revered in both Templar and Judaic mysticism. It represents wisdom, symmetry, and the bridge between the mortal and the divine. Such designs were not random. They were deliberate echoes of an ancient pattern, a silent conversation across time. And the coronation chair, perhaps the most mysterious relic of all. Carved in 1296, it cradles beneath it the Stone of Scone, the symbol of the unification of Scotland and England. Yet, when the chair was repaired in the 1950s, restorers found faint markings hidden beneath the stone: a star, a hand, a spiral. The photographs of these symbols exist in quiet archives, rarely shown. Scholars dismiss them as graffiti. Others whisper that they mirror the markings found in Rosslyn Chapel, the legendary heart of Templar geometry. The chair was returned to its place, the carvings unmentioned, and the silence resumed. Even the private corridors of Windsor tell their own story. Along one staircase, worn by centuries of footsteps, lies a barely visible carving, a rose pierced by a sword. It's the same motif found on medieval Templar tombs, on chapel walls in Portugal, and on garments of the Order of the Garter. Not official regalia, private sashes, worn only during closed ceremonies. One such garment adorned Elizabeth during the Garter ceremony of 1985. In photographs, faint embroidery can be seen on her sleeve, a circle of vines surrounding a five-pointed star. The symbol matches no known heraldry. To many, a star is just a star. To the Templars, it was a compass of the soul. Each point marked an element, a direction, a vow. It was a reminder not to seek the divine in heaven, but within. And Elizabeth surrounded herself with that shape again and again. On brooches, in gardens, in the architecture of her homes. At Balmoral, the garden paths spiral outward like a labyrinth. In Sandringham, the private chapel's tiled floors form two interlocking circles enclosed in a square, bordered by 8 small triangles, a pattern identical to one carved in the chapter house of Temple Church in London. Even her private Scottish drawing room features a stained glass window depicting a knight standing beside a veiled woman beneath an arch of 7 stars. No artist is credited, no date recorded. Coincidence becomes repetition. Repetition becomes intention. The language of symbols is subtle, but it is never accidental. When the same rose, the same cross, the same star appears across centuries of ritual and stone, it is not decoration, it is dialogue. Those who know how to read it see the continuity. Those who don't simply see beauty. One symbol above all others ties the feminine and the sacred together: the cross above the crescent moon. Often dismissed as mere Marian imagery, it appears in alchemical manuscripts as a sign of hidden truth guarded by divine light. In 1969, at her son's investiture as Prince of Wales, Elizabeth wore a brooch shaped like a cross resting upon a crescent, circled by pearls. No explanation was ever offered. The design appeared once, then vanished back into the vaults. Symbols endure where words cannot. They survive fire, censorship, and denial. They outlive kings. If Elizabeth inherited something older than the British crown, she did not proclaim it. She lived within its geometry. Her world was a constellation of meaning drawn across stone, silk, and ceremony. She never said, "I carry the blood." She walked through pentagonal corridors. She knelt beneath ceilings carved with roses and stars. She tended gardens shaped like labyrinths, and stood in silence where words would only diminish the truth. Some say the path to understanding is not written. It is traced. Follow the curves of stone, the threads of embroidery, the starlight on stained glass, the sword, the rose, the crown, all symbols, all chosen, all waiting to be read. The past doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it flickers back to life, not through lost relics or unearthed tombs, but through the modern echoes of a world that once lived in shadow. In our age, those echoes appear not in parchment or prophecy, but on screens, in headlines, in the strange symmetry of events that seem too familiar to ignore. What once whispered through cathedrals now hums through data and DNA. It began quietly, as revelations often do. In 2014, a documentary aired about England's Plantagenet kings. Archaeologists had uncovered the remains of Richard III beneath a parking lot in Leicester. a king buried in anonymity for 5 centuries. But the true shock came later. DNA analysis revealed a break in the official royal bloodline. Somewhere across generations, a father was not who the record claimed. The monarchy, that symbol of unbroken lineage, had a fracture. Historians dismissed it as irrelevant, yet for those who follow the old whispers, it was confirmation. Royal bloodlines are not what they seem. As genetic testing spread, noble families across Europe began submitting samples in secret. Most results remain locked away, bound by confidentiality and silence. But quiet leaks persist. Reports of anomalies, traces of Levantine ancestry appearing in unexpected branches, lines that should diverge, converging, strands of maternal DNA that seem to echo from the Eastern Mediterranean, the land of Jerusalem, where the Templar order was born. If the Grail bloodline is real, it would not run through titles or crowns, but through mothers, carried in silence, protected by women. It would be a legacy passed through flesh, not parchment. That is where myth and science begin to blur. At the same time, the old stories began resurfacing in new forms. Films, novels, and series. The Da Vinci Code, Nightfall, National Treasure, each spinning tales of Templars, secret relics, royal conspiracies, dismissed as fiction, yet strangely consistent in their imagery. The cross, the rose, the hidden queen. Myths reborn in the collective imagination as though something long buried was asking to be remembered. And as art reflected myth, history itself began to mirror it. In 2023, the coronation of King Charles III followed centuries of ritual, but small details caught the eyes of those who still read symbols. His robes bore new embroidery, stars, vines and roses, arranged in patterns nearly identical to those carved in ancient Templar chapels. The Queen Consort's brooch, worn only once and never explained, matched designs found in 15th century stonework at Rosslyn, too precise to be random, too quiet to be coincidence. Then came the painting. It appeared briefly at a London exhibition before being withdrawn, without comment. The artist, anonymous. The title, The Keeper of Light. It depicted a veiled woman seated beneath an arch of 7 stars, her hands resting on an orb, encircled by roses. The resemblance to Elizabeth II was unmistakable, yet what unsettled historians was not the likeness, but the inscription at the bottom corner, Latin, faint, half hidden beneath the paint. Regina Templi, the Queen of the Temple. Whether the artist knew or not, the symbol had returned. The whisper had resurfaced. History, once again, had begun to speak. The painting's removal only deepened the mystery. Within days of its quiet disappearance, rumors spread through art circles that it had been purchased by a private collector with connections to the royal household. No statement followed. The gallery issued a single line, artwork withdrawn at the request of the owner, but no one knew who that owner was or admitted to knowing. The last verified image of the piece shows faint reflections of light across its surface, as though captured from glass. 7 stars above a crowned figure, the orb at her feet glowing faintly gold. Soon after, speculation began to spiral online. Some claimed the painting contained hidden geometry, its composition following the proportions of the golden ratio, with the position of each star aligning to constellations visible above Windsor on the night of Elizabeth's coronation. Others believed the symbols were even older, fragments of sacred design tracing back to Solomon's temple itself. The more skeptics mocked the idea, the faster it spread. And then something stranger happened. In the months following the painting's withdrawal, an image began circulating among archivists and historians, an old sketch found in a private collection in Edinburgh. It was dated. The drawing depicted a woman in robes, identical to those seen in The Keeper of Light, seated beneath 7 stars. Her face was unfinished. At the bottom, the same inscription, Regina Templi, the Queen of the Temple. Coincidence, perhaps? Or continuity? For those who follow such trails, it was not art imitating life. It was revelation resurfacing. A thread pulled loose from history's tapestry, reminding the world that what we dismiss as myth has roots too deep to die. In the end, perhaps that is how the truth survives. Not as confession or proof, but as repetition, through symbols that reappear when memory begins to fade. Through rituals that repeat when the reason is long forgotten. Through stories that refuse to stay buried. If Elizabeth carried the secret of an ancient guardianship, she would have known that knowledge cannot live in words. It lives in echoes, in the things that seem to happen twice. The images that return, the names that won't stay gone. And now, as another monarch wears the crown, the same patterns are returning, the same insignias, the same silence, the same unease in those who feel, without understanding why, that something sacred has merely shifted hands. Perhaps the order was never destroyed, perhaps it was never meant to be. The torches of the Templars still burn, but not in temples of stone. They burn in blood, in memory, in the geometry of ritual. They burn in the quiet eyes of those who never speak of what they protect. The queen is gone, the crown has passed, but the whisper remains. And, if you listen closely, beyond history, beyond reason, you may still hear it. The sound of oaths spoken in candlelight, the echo of boots on stone, the promise that what was sacred will endure. It begins again, as it always does, quietly, like a pulse beneath the noise of history. The names change, the faces fade, yet the pattern endures. Every few generations, the symbols return. The red cross, the rose, the sword, the star. They surface not to be worshipped, but to remind, to hint that beneath the thrones, the wars, the myths, there has always been something older watching from the shadows. Today, the whisper does not travel through cloisters or carved halls. It moves through circuits and screens. It hides in archives labeled restricted, in data patterns too perfect to dismiss. Artificial intelligence now sifts through centuries of text, drawing unseen connections between royal charters, church records, forgotten seals, and sometimes, even the algorithms find what historians will not admit. A thread running unbroken from Jerusalem's dust to the marble floors of Windsor. Digital historians call it coincidence. Statisticians call it anomaly, but the echo continues. In documents once thought random, in coordinates that align with sacred geometry, in the recurrence of names that seem to orbit a single hidden truth, templum, the temple. In a world obsessed with revelation, the greatest secrets survive by adapting. The bloodline, if it still exists, may no longer need swords or secrecy. Its guardians now wear suits, not armor. They curate, they restore, they archive. Their duty remains unchanged. Protect the memory, preserve the line, keep the silence. And perhaps that was Elizabeth's truest legacy. Not the empire she ruled, but the continuity she embodied, the quiet endurance of something no fire could destroy. The rituals, the geometry, the words never spoken aloud, all of it was protection. She was not only the Queen of England, she was the keeper of the threshold between history and myth, between the world we record and the one we only sense. Now the question shifts to us, the watchers, the curious, the restless minds drawn to what history refuses to name. We have inherited the torch, though most do not know it. We seek meaning in fragments, light in silence, and maybe that's all the Order ever wanted. Not worship, but remembrance. If you followed this far, perhaps you feel it too, that faint stirring when the past leans too close, when stories become mirrors. Maybe it isn't about blood at all. Maybe the true grail is memory itself, passed hand to hand, name to name, so that what was once sacred is never entirely lost. The flame still burns, small but steady. The cross still casts its shadow, and the whisper, the one that began in stone corridors and echoed through royal halls, now moves through you. Are you listening? In 2024, a new official portrait of Queen Elizabeth II was unveiled. Posthumous, solemn, yet luminous. She sits, gaze lowered, fingertips resting on a carved stone armrest. Behind her, a stained glass window glows. In its panes, a single red rose lies at the foot of a sword, and above them, a star hangs poised. The artist called it an emblem of royal sacrifice and duty, but those fluent in the older language of signs read another sentence entirely. The rose and sword device of Templar law, the five-pointed star, the mark of the sacred feminine, the charge to guard truth. It felt less like commemoration than declaration. Then there are the so-called coincidences, too many to wave away. The number 13, forever stitched to Templar history by their downfall. On Friday the 13th, October 1307, across Elizabeth II's years, 13 major fires burned through royal properties. 13 foreign visits were cancelled with no public explanation. In her final year, 13 surfaced again and again in press bulletins, dates and notices. To most, it's nothing. To students of symbol, it's everything. 13 is the cipher of change, passage from seen to unseen. Even the digital world seems to hum with the same refrain. In 2022, an anonymous archive calling itself the Red Queen Files appeared for a moment and then vanished. It hosted scans of letters, photographs, and documents said to be drawn from suppressed royal holdings within them. References to blood guardians, a shadow chapel, and the phrase, "She wore the cross in silence." The site disappeared within days. A private firm acquired the domain and locked it down, but not before copies spread. Disinformation, some argued. A leak. Others insisted. Either way, the title struck a nerve. Elizabeth was seldom linked to the colour in life, yet in esoteric vernacular, red signals hidden royalty, the rose that bleeds without blooming. Modern myths endure because they feel ancient. The idea of a secret behind the throne isn't new, but today's tools make the veil thinner. Databases, drones, genealogical registries, AI reconstructions, patterns surface faster than gatekeepers can erase them, and what returns, again and again, is that the past hasn't vanished. It has gone quiet. In that silence, it has grown stronger. In 2025, a university team published an unexpected paper on hereditary symbolic communication in British aristocracy. Written in careful academic prose, the findings were still startling, repeating motifs, stars, roses, swords, recurring across generations in royal letters, seals and architecture, with placements not fully explained by heraldry alone. The authors concluded these patterns may indicate a sacred narrative sustained within secular tradition. They did not name Elizabeth II, but several case studies revolved around structures and regalia from her reign. What exactly are we remembering? Is the hyper-transparent present circling back to a wisdom once known only through quiet? Are we rediscovering not merely facts but meanings? Perhaps Elizabeth II, with her steady reserve, unbroken role, and deliberate symbolism, was more than monarch. Perhaps she was the last visible bearer of something old. The temple's long shadow reaches into our age, not by proclamation, but by intuition, by the sense that beneath modern noise, an echo remains, sacred duty, inherited silence, a lineage passed by choice rather than decree. If you feel it, truly feel it, it may be because no one needed to tell you. Some things you already knew. Begin, as all mysteries do, with what is missing. In 1936, renovations at the Round Church in Cambridge, an ancient site rumoured to have been used by medieval Templar circles, led workers to an unsettling discovery. Beneath the altar, they unearthed a lead box, small and heavy. Inside, fragments of parchment too decayed to read, and a thin stone tablet, carved with a faded emblem, a rose enclosed within a cross. It was photographed, logged, then quietly disappeared. The British Museum denied receiving it. The Cambridge Historical Society had no record. The last person to see it, a local archaeologist named Finch, left a single note in his journal before dying mysteriously 2 years later in a house fire. The note read, "It bears the seal of silence." Why do such relics vanish? Why are the same corridors of knowledge so often locked? Even today, entire wings of the royal archives at Windsor Castle remain sealed. Some are classified until 2050. Others, indefinitely. Among them are documents tied to royal correspondence during and after World War II, when the Freemasons and the Order of the Garter underwent quiet internal reformations. Scholars have requested access to the diaries of Queen Mary, Elizabeth's grandmother volumes, said to reference guardianship, a lady's code, and the gate of blood. Every request has been denied, no explanation given. Even the digital realm bears the same blacked-out edges. Within the National Archives online catalogue sits a listing titled Estate Transfers and Noble Holdings, 1600. One entry file 174B reads, Temple Grant, Royal Lineage Connection. The description stops mid-sentence. Attempts to access it return the message. Restricted for reasons of national interest. No other file in the collection carries that mark. The title alone hints at what history refuses to name. A bridge between Templar lands and royal succession. And then there are the people who vanish. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, a small circle of royal archivists and scholars who probed too close to certain genealogies simply disappeared from record. One, Eleanor Ramdin, an independent researcher, granted rare access to private royal libraries in the 1930s, published essays in obscure journals tracing the Templar echo in Tudor succession. Her final article ended cryptically, "There is a line unbroken, hidden in plain sight, but never claimed." She vanished soon after. No obituary, no forwarding address. Her notes sold anonymously at auction. They've never resurfaced. And what of the chapel beneath Balmoral? In 1981, rumors spread that a sealed subterranean chamber had been found during emergency repairs to the castle's west wing. A worker claimed it ended in a door carved not with the royal crest but with 2 interlocked rings and a 5-petaled rose symbols, linked to sacred union and secrecy in Templar tombs. The passage was resealed within days. The worker dismissed. No photographs, no statements. The symbol's description, however, matched carvings found in France and Scotland sites known to belong to the Old Order. Still, no official comment came. Even in death, Elizabeth's silence endures. Her burial within the King George VI Memorial Chapel was witnessed, yes, but not all of it. Some moments remained private. It's said one object was placed within the coffin, never disclosed. Whispers claim it was a handwritten letter, addressed not to family, but to the next guardian. Others say it was a ring centuries old, passed down through hands unrecorded by the crown. And around her lie more unanswered symbols, roses carved along the black marble, iron gates, traced with sacred geometry. Artistry, they said. Yet, every pattern chosen, every placement deliberate. In the archives, in the vaults, in the sealed rooms beneath estates and churches. The same sigils repeat, the Templar cross, the rose of silence, the sword through the circle, the same quiet question, what was she protecting? And the mysteries keep layering, one upon another, as if history itself were whispering through the cracks. Why, for instance, do royal records fade precisely where the story of blood and silence begins? Why are entire correspondences redacted under the veil of national interest? Despite a century of promises toward transparency, certain archives remain impenetrable. What truth could possibly require another generation of silence? Even the scholars who've tried to trace the line have felt the shadow. Files vanish, access revoked, names quietly removed from registries. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Silence is the new encryption. Still, fragments survive. A photograph mislabeled, a note misfiled, an object mentioned once in a footnote and never again. These fragments form constellations, points of light across centuries, and as you connect them, the same shapes return. A rose, a star, a sword, a queen. There are reports half denied, half whispered of artifacts sealed within Balmoral and Windsor, medallions etched with roses and crescent moons, manuscripts written in cipher, carved stones showing twin rings entwined around a sword's hilt. The official stance is always the same. No such item exists. But those who've worked in the archives tell a different story. Sealed crates, unmarked ledgers, storage rooms with no listed keys. Even Elizabeth's final resting place invites questions. The public ceremony was brief. The cameras cut early. What happened afterward was for few eyes only. Rumor speaks of a moment of silence, longer than protocol required, and a small velvet box placed inside the coffin by gloved hands. Some say it contained a letter addressed simply to she who watches next. Was it myth or message? What if these sealed rooms and silenced names are not cover-ups of scandal, but acts of protection, rituals, preserving knowledge too old and too delicate for the modern age? What if the Templar inheritance wasn't meant to be found, but kept until the world learned again how to listen? Elizabeth may not have been the final bearer of that vow, only its guardian. Her reign was not merely a record of politics, but a ceremony stretched over 70 years, a vigil of the rose, maintained through presence, patience and silence. Because silence, properly held, is not emptiness. It is preservation. It is language spoken only by those who remember what cannot be written. Queen Elizabeth II may have embodied that principle more perfectly than any monarch before her. She revealed nothing by accident. Every pause, every glance, every withheld word felt deliberate, shaped by something older than etiquette. Her reign was not defined by upheaval, but by endurance. Consider what truly vanished when the Templars fell in their fortresses crumbled, their treasures seized, their order dissolved, but their knowledge did not die. It retreated into secrecy. The understanding of sacred geometry, of divine proportion, of inherited duty and symbolic guardianship. That is how memory survives. Not through proclamations, but through presence. Ritual replaces record. The same paths are walked again, not out of habit, but out of vow. Cathedrals and chapels built in alignment with stars, ceremonies repeated for centuries without anyone remembering why. Yet someone always does. Someone keeps the rhythm. Her stillness was not absence. It was protection. Sacred things do not shout. They choose their listeners. And those who hear do not repeat. Silence, in that sense, was Elizabeth's truest language. She wore it the way others wear armor, not to conceal weakness, but to preserve strength. When the world shouted, she waited. When the crowd demanded answers, she gave symbols instead. A brooch, a color, a phrase woven into ritual. Every gesture deliberate, every absence meaningful. It's easy to believe that history belongs to those who speak the loudest, but endurance has never come from noise. It comes from those who guard what must not be broken, the stories too fragile for speech, the truths that lose their power when shouted. Elizabeth's silence was not emptiness. It was a vault, and within it perhaps rested something older than any throne. Because this story, the thread we've followed through fire and centuries, has never truly been about power. It's about continuity. The kind that survives through symbols, through repetition, through devotion. A rose carved where no one looks. A cross hidden beneath layers of gold and ceremony. A monarch who understands that sometimes to protect something sacred, you must let it live in mystery. Look closely at her resting place, the black marble, the iron lattice, the carved roses that wind around the stone. Artistic, they said. Decorative. But those who know the old language of symbols see pattern, not ornament. Each mark deliberate, each curve echoing the same geometry that once shaped the Templar cathedrals of Europe. And maybe that's the point, that her grave was never meant to end a story, but to seal it. Not to silence history, but to preserve it until someone else, patient, listening, was ready to hear again. There are those who say that silence is death. But they misunderstand. Silence is preservation, the soil in which memory takes root. It's how sacred things survive when language grows brittle and history forgets how to listen. When Elizabeth died, the headlines called it the end of an era. Perhaps it was something else. Not an ending, but a handover. What she carried through decades of ceremony and restraint wasn't power. It was remembrance. A promise passed through gestures instead of words. Through the weight of ritual rather than the ink of record. Because not all inheritances are meant to be named. Some move unseen through the stillness of a chapel, through the measured rhythm of a procession, through the eyes of those who watch and understand without asking. Legacy, stripped of its gold and pageantry, is simply continuity, the pulse that endures beneath the changing of crowns. It doesn't survive in vaults or archives. It lives in action, in the steady hands that light the next candle before the old flame fades, in the quiet decision to remember when forgetting would be easier. That is transformation, not spectacle, but persistence. And if this legacy still breathes, if the vow once sworn in shadow still echoes today, it's because someone, perhaps someone like you, chose to listen. You've walked through centuries tonight, through corridors of stone and whispers of fire, through oaths, symbols, and shadows that refuse to die. And now you stand here, not at the end, but at the threshold. Because stories like this one don't finish. They wait. They echo through time, through blood, through silence. They wait for someone willing to listen. Elizabeth carried something, not a secret written in code, but a memory too sacred for speech. When she was gone, she didn't bury it. She placed it softly in the space between knowing and not knowing, where the faithful still stand guard. And maybe, somehow, you found your way there too. The question was never, is it real? The question has always been, can you feel it? Because the true inheritance of the temple isn't in blood or title. It's in remembrance. It's in the quiet devotion to things unseen, to the geometry of belief, to the poetry of silence. Every era has its guardians. Some wear crowns, some walk in shadow, some simply listen. Perhaps you've always been listening. Perhaps that's why you found this story. Because what is preserved in secrecy is never meant to stay hidden, only to be found by those who can see without sight and hear without sound. So when you wake tomorrow, don't forget the hush that's fallen around you now. It's not emptiness, it's invitation, a thread waiting to be picked up, a flame waiting to be kept. And maybe, just maybe, as you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, you'll feel it. The echo of footsteps in the stone corridor, the soft murmur of oaths long kept, the pulse of an ancient vow that somehow survived the centuries to reach you. You are not just the listener, you are the continuation, the keeper of quiet, the guardian of the unseen. Because the story doesn't end here. It endures in silence, in symbol, in you.